Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're calling from. Happy to have everybody attending today's webinar, which is going to be pretty fun, I believe. My name is Brian Robison. I'm the Chief Evangelist here at BlackBerry Cylance, and I've got with me today an amazing panel of folks. And we're going to go ahead and get started, even though folks are joining in. That allows us to get through a lot of our cool predictions and conversations. Do fill that out and send that over. Safe harbor statements, obviously, things that are talked about here aren't commitments from BlackBerry or Cylance, so you can't use it against us in a legal proceeding. And I'm sure Greg is exploding as we hear that happening in the background. Anyway, as I said, my name is Brian Robison. I am your host today. In the room we have, or in our virtual room essentially, we have an amazing set of folks who are going to bring a lot of insight and knowledge into today's discussion. And I would like to go ahead and turn it over to the folks in the room to introduce themselves, maybe say something a little bit funny and personal if they wish. But let's just do left to right here. So John.
Well, thank you, Brian, and it's good to be with everybody. Hello, I am John McClurg. I come to you this morning in this room from a decade in academia, a decade in the intelligence community, law enforcement, and then almost now 20 years in the private sector where I served as a CSO over both cyber and physical interests at Lucent Bell Labs, Honeywell, Dell, and then most recently, after I discovered the strength and prowess of something I found hard to believe at first, but I was ultimately convinced that the prowess and strength of AI and machine learning, and jumped to Cylance as a VP in its Office of Security and Trust, and as its ambassador at large, that actually Michael Dell first bestowed upon me, and served in that capacity for almost 4 years when in the wake of the BlackBerry merger, I jumped into a larger role as the Senior VP and CISO of the new BlackBerry. It's great to be with you. Greg?
Hello, my name is Greg Silberman. I'm Vice President and Deputy General Counsel here at BlackBerry. I actually joined Cylance 4 years ago and served there as Deputy General Counsel and its first Chief Privacy Officer. Prior to that, I was one of the founding partners of the cybersecurity practice at Jones Day, global law firm with, I think, something on the order of 3,000 attorneys in 47 countries. And before that, in the distant past, I was an electrical engineer working for Lawrence Berkeley and Lawrence Livermore National Labs before going to law school, and then continuing to work on in the national lab system as an attorney. Looking forward to the call today, and I'll actually go with one more piece of housekeeping. Any comments or advice you hear are not necessarily representative of those of BlackBerry, its customers, or in some instances, even some of the panel. And anything I may say, I am most likely not your lawyer, so please use this as educational, not legal advice. Eric, to you.
Thanks, Greg. Yeah, I feel like you said that specifically for me, right?
A little bit.
Yeah. My name's Eric Milam. I'm the VP of Research Operations here at BlackBerry Cylance. I've joined Cylance as well a little over 4 years ago. And prior to that, I spent many years as a hacker, attack and pen, and ran the attack and pen team for Accuvant Labs, and came over to the defensive side, and my teams are really focused on anything related to malware, threat hunting, threat intelligence, threat research. It's been a fun ride, and I'm excited to be part of this panel. Sig?
Yeah, thanks, Eric. Hey, everybody. My name is Sig Murphy. I am the consulting director for our services team for the Western region. And in that role, I oversee all of our engagements, be they proactive, pre-breach prevention type engagements, as well as incident response or, reactive post-breach work. I spent 12 years as a DoD contractor, and then back in 2006, 2007, I started to work in earnest on commercial breaches, and I served as the lead investigator for a number of large-scale breaches that you've probably heard of, including breaches at some major U.S. stock exchanges, some political hacking, email hacking that was recently in the news, or not so recently, but came to Cylance in 2017. And like John and others, I was blown away by the difference that artificial intelligence and machine learning can make in really enabling us as practitioners to do our jobs, whether that's preventative or helping new clients that experience a breach and getting them into a safe state. So it's my pleasure to be here with everybody today. And I am father, husband, and when I can, in the very wee early hours of the morning, occasionally a gamer still, as well as a maker. So excited today. We've got a fantastic panel, and I'll pass it back to you, Brian.
Great. Thank you, Sig. And thank you, everybody else. And I think Sig is probably the only one who actually said something kind of funny. Although in the background behind me, we're not doing video, but I actually have turkeys gobbling in my backyard right now. So hopefully we won't hear the turkeys gobble too much on the audio today. But anyway. All right. Well, let's just go ahead and jump directly into our first set of topics. We're going to kind of talk about some issues that are happening in the cybersecurity industry, whether you're on the defensive side in organizations or some of us like on the kind of the vendor side. But there's definitely some shifts coming here. And John, I'd like to go ahead and pass it over to you to go ahead and start these topics, and then you guys go ahead and have at it. Let's have some fun.
Thanks, Brian. You know, it amazes me that at the beginning of each new year, just how many offerings appear out there on the social media, prognostications for the new year. One of my most favorite movies for years has been Bill Murray in Groundhog Day, where he extols the groundhog as the prognosticator of all prognosticators. He only has to get a 50-50 chance of getting it right, and only on one topic, the weather. But I'm amazed as I see these offerings, just how they proliferate out there, all attempting to be what they may call a guide for the perplexed. And given the nature of the times in which we live, clearly there's a lot to be perplexed about out there. I write each month a column in Security Magazine, and I guess joining the crowd in that regard, I offered what I called my prognostications for the new year out there. And I'm amazed that already out of the blocks, this early in the year, I mean, we're still in that first month, that one of those areas that I called out as clearly going to be one of the areas that is going to capture our attention was in the area of mobile cybersecurity. It was going to become a major concern for organizations. Now, I guess I wasn't actually surprised when I learned or heard of the alleged Saudi hack of the Amazon CEO, Jeff Bezos. But usually my predictions don't come or materialize quite that quick. But it did call that issue of mobile cybersecurity to the forefront. I guess I was keenly aware that I personally have somewhat reveled in the comfort that I saw in the strength that AI and machine learning could bring to the endpoints, but also at the same time always appreciated that there's this other component of our complete protection strategy that was out there hanging in the breeze, if you will, the mobile security piece. And then had this confirmed on my radar with the attack that Bezos experienced. And you add or overlay on top of that the fact that Gartner is, I think, estimating that amongst all of us out there, only about 30% of our organizations have what they call a mobile threat defense in place. So we're really very naive if we think it's just poor Jeff Bezos that's going to be hit by this, or there probably have been others already who've been hit by it, but maybe we just don't know. They didn't have the visibility or the profile that Jeff did, but we're naive to think that it's only going to be Jeff in the months and the year ahead, and that we at our peril continue to neglect or overlook the importance of bringing that same strength that we now apply at the endpoint in terms of what AI and machine learning can bring to bear, but that we stall or delay at our peril in any efforts to bring that forward also into the mobility space. Does that resonate with the rest of you in terms of the concern and the focus you think we ought to be giving to that aspect in this new year?
From an incident response perspective, we are sure seeing mobile devices starting to be included in the attack space, and be that with mobile spear phishing, which we see increasing across the board. I think everybody's gotten those cringeworthy text message spear phish attempts, to just the other types of vulnerabilities that are present on mobile devices. I think that is going to be an increasing attack structure and place where the bad guys are going.
It's also to keep in you're much more likely to be responding quickly on a mobile device. People don't lug their laptops onto the subway in the back of taxi cabs. They don't check their laptop typically late at night drinking from a bar. They will check their mobile device. They will answer an email. They may respond to a text message. And I think the opportunity to catch someone under stress, under pressure, someone more likely to fall prey to some form of social engineering is much higher on a mobile device than it might be sitting in your office in front of a desktop, or even just sitting at home in front of the laptop. The fact that it's the smaller screen, you're typing typically, shorter responses, And reactive design, even when implemented properly, you may be looking at a fairly crappy display of an email. So when you get that phishing email or a legitimate email, they may not look right anyway on the mobile device. So the likelihood of responding to something suspicious is probably higher than it would be in the desktop environment.
And I would say what we're going to continue to see and what we're already seeing, right, is a blurring of the networks, right? We all probably use personal devices for work stuff, right? I know that there's safeguards in place, but we throw around the term zero trust a lot. And I think that as we continue down this road with the items that were brought up here, what we're really seeing is that endpoint, like you said, no longer really exists on a laptop. It doesn't exist on a computer. It now exists in the hands of every single person who will exist on your network at that point. And extending that out that far is extending the attack surface, but also really blurring the lines between what the capabilities are. And now I think also if I was to throw 5G in there and the capabilities that upgrade's going to bring to the mobile network and the amount of data that we can now transfer and do, that's also going to be another area I think where attackers are going to try to leverage.
Another interesting aspect of the Jeff Bezos experience is that the message that come in through someone that he was familiar with or knew, the crown prince, right? So he was beguiled by what appeared to be the close relationship of the sender. And what I found interesting, because I've long been sort of a fan of the old practice of steganography. It seems like steganography is a kind of a roller coaster ride. You see different aspects of it presenting itself again. And I love those old stories of when that was either the Romans or the Greeks wanted to send a tattooed secret message. They would shave the head of the messenger, tattoo it on his head, have him grow back his hair, and then send him off running to deliver the message. That in this instance with Jeff, that apparently, the malware, the payload arrived inside a video. And so which smacked to me sort of as a new variant of the old friend steganography presenting itself in yet another very, very interesting but very damaging sort of way.
It's interesting you bring that up as well. We had seen in the IR side, we've seen drips and drabs of steganography usage. Sometimes we've seen picture files that have encoded commands and things like that. But overall, it's not very prevalent. But it is something that I think is an interesting pivot for certain attackers to consider for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. We did a recent write-up where we found them using WAV files and embedding the payloads in the WAV files. And the interesting thing was they knew what they were doing because the WAV files actually played music.
So I guess we can sort of look at also is, clearly as the attack surfaces grow, as IoT devices become ubiquitous, as the interconnection of work and personal space becomes even more enmeshed, there's a need for greater and greater cybersecurity professionals, both within organizations and building the tools and available to support. I think we've all, in all of our departments across the organization, have experienced a tremendous hiring crunch and difficulty, filling roles. Who here is seeing sort of an opportunity for AI to augment the employees we have?
You know what, Greg, on that point, I actually see AI offering us some new insights into what we claim is this talent crunch. Because as I sit back and I look at what challenged me in my prior roles, both at Lucent, Honeywell, and Dell, I often was challenged to keep a complete staff in place, given what I had built in the way of a defense in depth structure. Those defense in depth structures are complex, they're resource intensive, and unfortunately, ultimately ineffective. But because of the number of humans it takes to staff up a defense in depth approach, we in part face what's been touted as this talent crunch, this resource constraint. What I'm curious to see, and I have high hopes pegged to this, that once you start to get your act together in terms of how you deal with what's way up high in the kill chain, the top of that defense in depth structure, your approach to antivirus, and we know the extent to which malware still seems to claim or be responsible for a bulk of the challenges we face. But once we start getting our act together up there, to the tune of like 99.7% of a kill rate in terms of that 90% that we hear ascribed to data losses tied to malware, you see that the downstream structures that we put in place to mitigate that anemic performance are going to be stressed a lot less and may actually liberate and free up some of those resources that we can then turn to some of these emerging areas like the trusted insider conundrum. So I've always looked at this because like you said, Greg, I hear this almost on a weekly basis, some new aspect of the talent crunch that the states are trying to deal with, that the federal government is trying to build up. And yet I'm wondering, though, if we're not going to see some relief just because of the success of the model, which would be another reason for championing and trying to get it out there as quickly as possible. In my new role at BlackBerry, of course, we like to drink our own champagne. I'm anxious to see just what will be those liberating downstream consequences and how that may help me personally with what would otherwise be that challenge of finding talent, well-trained, good talent, and then bringing them on board. My perspective, at least on that particular, might touch on the elephant if you were.
Yeah, this is Eric. Yeah, from my perspective, we tend to leverage, obviously we're an AI company, so it makes it easy for us. But we do tend to leverage AI to really automate away the simple things and even some complex things. And so what I'm really seeing a shift of, at least within my teams and within my org, within research, is really hiring more senior folks and needing more senior folks. Now, I don't know if that actually helps the hiring crunch, but essentially what we're seeing is we're leveraging things like using centroids and math models specifically to do hunting for us. Right. And to really dig up and pull up the intelligence bits, which allows our folks to more closely and better align with hunting these APT groups and these other groups that are out there. And so we're really using AI to augment kind of that first level and that first tier. And I don't know what you guys think about that. I don't know if that adds to the hiring crunch or not, but trying to find senior folks when you've kind of gotten rid of the layer where they might learn might lead to some difficulties as well.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, Eric. On the services side with GUARD, our managed prevention and response capability, we really have kind of turned that model on its head. Usually there's traditionally a 3-tier SOC model for security operations centers where your tier 1 is kind of that junior tier, folks that are new to their roles and really kind of have that first gatekeeper role, if you will, on all the alerts coming in. And I know that GUARD utilizes our AI and machine learning technology to almost eliminate that tier on that service, where really then the machine's handling kind of that tier 1 sifting. And then tier 2 is kind of the first touch point for more seasoned SOC analysts. And that's been really shown to be very successful. I do see your point, though, on if we're eliminating that tier, does that kind of cause a downstream effect? And I think kind of like any other change to automation, and be it Henry Ford with the assembly line or other examples we have in history, I think what you're going to see is that the folks that utilize that technology that's causing that change are going to have a distinct advantage over some of the other folks out there that are not utilizing it. So I think that probably the market's going to adapt, but it will be interesting to see how that happens.
So yeah, while it may have helped at that lower level, it may just exacerbate the talent scarcity at that higher level and make it even a bigger challenge. And then we have a pipeline problem. Those more senior talented individuals are going to eventually retire. And if our AI has sort of culled our forces down low, which would be the future senior participants, then we're going to have a pipeline problem that we won't have the incoming talent to be our more senior talent of the future.
Now, those are some great points, and I really like. We've talked a pretty broad set of topics here. I mean, we talked about, how trustworthy we are of mobile devices, which can lead us into potential threats there, how we can augment employees and make them and allow them to focus on driving businesses forward rather than dealing with issues and incidents. Let's go ahead and move into our next topic. And this is probably, one of the most keen things that's been on Greg's mind lately. So let's lead off with him, where we're talking about things of where, these ideas of where privacy does not give you necessarily security, or even regulations and some of these things that we have out there. Compliance does not give us security either. Greg, would you go ahead and start here, please?
Sure. I have a teenage daughter, so everything is all about social media and hashtag this, hashtag that. The parents and the uncles and aunts on the phone can probably relate to a degree. Maybe some of those who are big on this. But the one place where hashtags don't belong are privacy and security. And I've seen a tremendous rise in the last few years of companies telling us about their security and telling us about their privacy compliance and then completely falling down. It's not adequate to append #privacy, #secure to the end of marketing. It's actually a job for the entire organization, and it needs that the chief technology officer, the CISO, the developers, the legal, the compliance groups within an organization view privacy and security together, because while it is worthwhile and a truism to say there's no privacy without security, without privacy, I question whether or not the entire endeavor is somewhat useless, because you need to protect, the human rights of individuals. And even if you're secure in that management, if that data is being abused, those personal rights are being abused, we need to turn to it and address them, more directly. Going forward into 2020, we're going to continue to see people telling us how much privacy and security they are providing. But I'm going to ask everybody in the audience to don't trust anyone. Look at it. Really examine the products, tools, services that you use, not just in the security context, but across all of the modern interactions that you are faced with day to day. My prediction around this is we'll see increased discussions of it, and with that, increased failures. We're going to start to see more and more regulatory enforcement of companies that have made representations that they provide security or provide privacy. And when they fail to do an adequate job, that's when you're going to see the Data Protection Board in the Europe come after companies. As we've all known, GDPR, 99 articles, only one of them is about security. But that one about security has been the basis of some of the larger fines. We have companies tell us, oh, we won't be evil, we won't do the wrong thing, we're protecting your data. But if they're not being transparent, we just saw Google get slapped with a 50 million euro fine. And I think what we're going to see is ongoing regulatory enforcement that is going to hold companies to a higher standard. Now, unfortunately, all of the regulators, whether it's the state attorney general, the Federal Trade Commission, the data protection offices around the world, have limited resource. And so many companies are going to get away doing a half-assed job and are not going to be offering meaningful security or meaningful privacy. That's why it's going to continue to be good business for cyber criminals going into the future. And it's job security for those of us at BlackBerry Cylance. That said, it is something that we should all endeavor when we examine our own organizations and move forward in trying to actually do more and go beyond just the marketing flag. Okay, I'll climb down off my soapbox and have maybe someone out here wants to tell me, oh, Greg, you're being, cynical.
Well, I'm not cynical, Greg, but I'd say that there are those who've written and have claimed that this is a generational concern. Israel and Scoble, in their book, The Age of Context, basically said that with the rise of the millennials, and as that population grows in their age and their involvement in the community, that this classic focus on privacy, conceived as it was conceived by their parents and their grandparents, is being supplanted by a value that they place on what they call contextual richness, or the thrill and the joy and the experience they have in life when, arriving late at their hotel late at night because it's after 10 o'clock, that the hotel automatically knows that your favorite comfort food is, let's say, spaghetti bolognese. They know that your program tomorrow morning begins at a certain hour, but it's going to rain, so that they know the hotel car needs to pick you up a half an hour earlier, and will then also adjust your wake-up call to accommodate that. And that all that comes together in a very interesting way that adds contextual richness to their lives, and in a way that requires the disclosure of information that maybe their parents and their grandparents would have thought, well, no, that's very private, and that they don't have the same concern with the classically conceived areas of privacy concern, because they're putting a bigger premium on this contextual richness. Not that they want to throw security to the wind or be cavalier in any way, but that they look at some of the issues that their parents and those who wrote GDPR, or those who are currently in the legislatures, and said, now if we were in those places, we might be advancing new legislation that's slightly different in its focus and its concern. I wonder to what extent maybe this is going to be a generational thing. Of course, laws live for quite a while, and the incoming dominant group would have to sort of amend or modify whatever is currently put in place. But I thought that was an interesting argument on the part of Israel and Global.
And I think that's very well true for a privileged class who are traveling on business at hotels that will take care of these things for them. But when people are denied health care, when people face higher interest rates, when people can't get mortgages, when decisions about your employability are made based upon that same data, is that as contextually a rich and satisfying experience, even if it's correct? That, that pasta bolognese and chocolate cake you had, yes, that's your favorite comfort food, but we note that you eat it 75 times a year. And we suspect that that's done, and we've noticed your key doesn't badge into the gym whenever you're staying with us. And you're at that wake up call, you requested it pretty late at night and it got set for pretty early. So you're not sleeping much. So yeah, we'll pass that on to the insurance company that maybe your premium should go up, old white man.
That's an interesting, I haven't heard what the contextual richness aspect of, let's say, the way in which your doctor may engage you on a problem or something that, what would be the equivalent of contextual richness in some of these other areas that would apply outside of your privileged class status, but might be applicable to everyone regardless of their economic positioning. It's just, again, from a discussion perspective, the contextual richness doing battle with the values and the issues of the privacy traditionally conceived was an interesting argument, and I think I'll keep an eye on as the years continue to unfold and as these millennials continue to engage more. Of course, we know the way they post out on social media is somewhat conducive to some of the prowess that the adversaries has when it comes to their spear phishing attacks. What really makes a spear phishing attack particularly effective is what I call the beguiling specificity that the adversaries wrap the email in. And a lot of that specificity is, again, harvested from millennials who have no qualms at all in posting out these intimate details of their lives that can be harvested then, woven into the email, sent off to them in a way that when they read it, it strikes them as very beguiling because it has such familiarity woven into it, and they click. So,
well, my favorite on social media has always been the prevalence on certain sites of quizzes to identify so important things as what sort of potato are you, or what is your favorite, that are basically, which Avenger would you be, that are these tremendously useful tools, especially when combined with Bayes' theorem, or more sophisticatedly, a little bit of machine learning, or just harvesting when it's like, what's your favorite sports team? Questions that can then be used to guess at passwords, or just straight up provide open source intelligence that can be used to then gather more information or better target a spear phishing attack.
I think my favorite one is if your social security number is how much money you had in your bank, how rich would you be? I think that's my favorite one.
That's an excellent one.
Yes.
And I love the fact that I actually had someone forward one of these quizzes to me at a privacy day. And it was just like, you must be kidding me.
But again,
that's awesome.
But back to the point of contextual richness, is the user, the person who engages those quiz, experiencing some sort of a value that they find pleasurable, or that it somehow leaves them feeling that, hey, my environment out here on social media is somehow enriched by the sense of familiarity and closeness or connectedness that I have because you're the same Avenger character as I am. And that, they put a premium or a value on that sense of community, and almost to the point that they say, well, I value that sense of community or that connectedness that I can now have with Greg that I didn't have before, and I maybe put a premium on that above and beyond whatever scary stories Greg may be able to spill me that might happen because I put that information out there in order to have that sense of connectedness.
And this is why I play old school pen and paper D&D, because I can get that social interaction and I don't have to share information and depend upon what Mark Zuckerberg or some social other media platform executive has determined is the appropriate amount of stickiness for their website to generate the most ad revenue or data sales revenue out of it. I have very, very strong opinions, some of which I'll keep to I'll rein in for a second. But I think that the most important thing to look here is people need to examine what value do they get from providing data. Maybe you want to do maybe it's really important to you to, you want to register for baby gifts at the local big box store because you want people to know what you need and what to buy you. That's a good value. Granted, you're contributing to and it's not even machine learning, it's based upon Bayes' theorem, that company's ability to predict when other people become pregnant or are trying to get pregnant because you're giving them a birth date and then it's fused with your previous shopping history, a la Target, to come up with your likelihood of being pregnant. And since pregnant families are tremendously valuable as targets for advertising, that's super valuable to them. Now, is it worth it to do a registry? Yeah, it is, because people ask me, what gifts do I want for the baby? All right, I'll do this thing, because I want to participate in modern society and have that as an option so that I don't end up with, 40 different bottle warmers.
Yeah, I think as the lines continue to blur, I think obviously you've made a great point where I don't think people understand the value of their data. I have a daughter who's 23 now, and obviously I have 4 other kids around the teenage years. And the familiarity of these things that we're discussing, they don't understand that there's actually a value associated with the information they're giving at that point in time. And that's why I think the regulation enforcement has to be continually ongoing. I know that in the old days, I don't know if it's switched, but PCI, HIPAA, all those things, you go in, you get your certificate, you get compliance. On that one day, you were determined to be compliant. And I think that with the way data flows and the way things move now, we really need a solid opportunity to provide ongoing regulation, ongoing enforcement of that. I'm curious if you think that the bodies can keep up, the regulated bodies can keep up with that level.
No, flat out. No,
The
rise and development of technology is much too fast. There is not enough expertise in a lot of the regulatory bodies to advise them on what's possible. Despite that example that I gave about using birth registries as part of a mechanism to gather data to determine whether or not someone is pregnant. I mean, granted, that's based on Bayes' theorem, which is from the 18th century, conditional probability. So it's a classic piece of math that was being utilized. And even that was really not the sort of thing ever being considered. But we look at it and go, it's how technology gets applied, not the novelty or the newness of the tech necessarily. And so the fact is that, as more and more data gets used for whether it's sales and marketing, research, personalization, and customization. I love it when Netflix recommends a new show to me and they get it right. But do I love the fact that they now have a very detailed profile on the sorts of things my family and I enjoy? I don't know. Depends on, how much trust I have on them in a company. And that's why, sort of going back to my first point, privacy and security has to be more than a hashtag. And as companies, we all need to do a better job of making sure that we earn the trust of our customers and that we focus on protection of their data, both through our security, but also our use of the data they choose to entrust to us.
Well, and Greg, I think irrespective of what the makeup of future legislative bodies is, the fact of the matter, and this is a very pragmatic approach, is that right now with the new, the California legislation, GDPR, right now there are very real, and you mentioned some of these fines, there are very real consequences to failing to comply with these things. And that for that reason alone, we as corporations need to pay particular attention, because the failing to do so is consequential in very real dollar terms.
I mean, we haven't seen the $1 billion fine yet, but GDPR provides that the most significant offenses can carry fines of $20 million or the larger of $20 million or 4% of a company's annual revenue. That's starting to become real money.
Real money.
Yeah, I do remember a time when the companies would just write off the PCI fine or whatever the fine was as just the cost of doing business. And we're just willing to pay the fine rather than be in regulation.
Awesome points and some great topics there. We learned, obviously Greg plays D&D on paper. I myself really enjoy as a hobby whenever I get a chance to. My kids and I, we refurbish 30-year-old computers, specifically, old Bucket Macs and things like that. And they love to play those nice black and white games, and I don't have to worry about them being online and sharing a lot of their private data if they have these machines in their room. It's very difficult to actually get some of these machines on the internet today. So
if they manage to connect one of those old Bucket Macs to the internet, you feel that they've probably demonstrated enough that they'll set up a good VPN and obfuscate their identity, adequately.
Oh yeah, we actually have a web server running on a Mac SE30, which is pretty cool. So it's possible. All right, so let's go ahead and move on into some actual tactics of different types of attacks that are happening out there, where we at Cylance have been showing demonstrations for years of how easy it is to actually obtain really, really, really nasty malware, how to be essentially a bad guy, where these sites have marketing campaigns, if you will. They've got support. Let's kind of talk a little bit about this, and maybe Eric will lead off with you this time in this area, as these are some of the things that your research group is actually kind of out there keeping an eye on for us.
Yeah, no, thanks, Brian. It's somewhat interesting, right? I would say, ransomware was something that was used relatively sparingly. And then it seemed like when WannaCry came out in 2017, it was like, I don't know if you want to call it rebirth, but there was obviously, everybody knows, widespread attention around that. And then there was maybe a brief period of decline, and then it just came back with a vengeance, right? And so what the attackers ended up really coming around to was, okay, this is not just something that's commodity anymore. This is something that we can actually use to start targeting. And it became a very viable cyber weapon. I think if most of the items that we look at that come through for threat research are some form of Ryuk, Sodanakibi, Gand Crab, but some flavor of a ransomware as a service that makes it extremely easy just to go out and do it. And what the attackers are doing is they're choosing their victim. They're having targeted attacks. They find the best way in, which is, we'll probably talk about again later, which is spear phishing or credential theft. But once they have access to that and they steal everything, you've seen it recently where they'll ransomware everything, and then basically tell them, hey, we've got all this data, we're going to sell it anyway, but if you don't pay us, we're going to start leaking this to everybody on the internet. That's just going to continue to grow. I think the threat actors behind it are going to build better and more efficient mousetraps. And I think it's one of those things that until we find a really good solution for it, until we can solve it, it's just going to continue to be used. When I was an attacker, I used the same attack over and over. I mean, you use something until the wheels fall off. I might be dating myself a bit, but I remember when SQL injection was a big deal. And is it? Yeah. Well, I think there was something that came back around recently, but it was like a huge, huge, huge thing. And it slowly started to subside as we took steps towards that. And I think that we are in the throes of that right now for ransomware attacks as well.
The bar just keeps getting lower and lower and lower for who can launch a ransomware attack. If you can manage to find yourself to gray or black cyber market and download the kit, you can put yourself in business. If you can figure out how to use a Bitcoin wallet. And the most amusing one I've seen recently is one where the author of the kit did a really nice job of it, had a great user interface. It's like, man, you could be making real money doing legitimate work, but clearly this is more profitable or more to your bend. But it basically would take you purchased it for a fairly low price, but then it ended up taking a piece of whatever ransoms got paid in the future. And so it would, you type in what your Bitcoin as the attacker wallet might be that you wanted to receive payments on, and then it would send 90% of the payment to you and the other 10% to a Bitcoin wallet being maintained by the author of the kit.
Yeah, and Gand Crab, they offer support services. I mean, they've set up to be a legitimate company, right? To provide services and support. It's insane.
Or I've seen better technical support on like ransomware payments, when it's going after individuals rather than companies, where it hits the non-technically sophisticated user and they don't know what a Bitcoin wallet is. It's literally telephone support talking you through how to set up a Bitcoin wallet and make that payment. I think it's especially funny because then they'll actually get people to give them a credit card over the phone to make the payment of their ransom, because they get confused and don't realize it's not some legitimate business trying to help them pay their ransom, but it's a different criminal organization. And now they've captured your credit card number as well as you've made a payment to them.
And Greg, to a consumer like that, my heart really goes out to them. And maybe because I've now stepped back into an operational role, that same sort of understanding, I don't find being extended when I read in the headlines some of my peers being hit and compromised by ransomware. I'm just sort of shaking my head, maybe because of the epiphany I had almost, over 4 years ago, where I discovered the strength and the prowess of AI-enabled math models that have a predictive value or capability, years into the future. I mean, there was the NSS lab report that captured how they took everything that, the worst that set 2017, 16, and 2000, whatever could throw at us, went back in time to the math model as she existed in 2015, threw it at her, and she killed it all. And I'm thinking, that gives her the predictive value. I think of that movie Minority Report, where, of course, the precogs you could predict in a few weeks or months at best. And here he's predicting, our math models predict years in advance. And I'm thinking, with that kind of predictive power out there and the way it's been advertised and it's known to be out there, I find myself, I feel their pain incredibly, but I don't find myself being too charitable to my peers, the professions out there, with all this knowledge out there, still allowing their organizations to be compromised in this way. And so I ask myself, with that compelling information there, what is it about this inertia that seems to be holding the industry and my peers at bay or prisoner? And I've puzzled over this quite a bit, and I've kind of settled that one of the elements that contributes to that inertia is the time, energy, and effort my peers and I spent in giving birth to that defense in-depth signature-based antivirus and all the associated incident response structures down below. The time, energy, and effort we put into creating that, populating it with people whose spouses' names we now know, we know their children, we get very emotionally tied to the individuals that populate that defense in-depth structure, so that even though we know that maybe our signature base isn't going to help us too much and it's not going to stop an attack that might come in, that as long as we know our mean time to detection is sort of tweaked down and that we can move rather quickly in our detection of it. And as long as our boss isn't beating us up right now on some revenue contribution and cutting our budget, then I'm sitting satisfied with the expense associated with that defense in depth and the fact that it's reactive and that I debate or cross my fingers that I'll detect and move to interdict it quickly enough. Of course, that game all changes with, I think, ransomware, and that's what maybe I think is going to change this game a little bit. I'm just a little surprised it hasn't worked more quickly and had an more thorough going than the headlines of every day seem to suggest. The inertia still seems to have the strength to hold my peers in a state of inactivity or I guess hope or crossing their fingers that what they've had historically in place is going to serve them in an environment with ransomware, where the nature of ransomware isn't going to allow them. What's mean time to detection going to do to you when they've already encrypted your data and you're a prisoner of ransomware? I'm a little puzzled by that development.
What's the tipping point, right? I mean, I know that there was, a lot of press around the city of Atlanta, but I don't have the specifics of this in my head, but I know around the Christmas time, I read an article about a small company. I think they had to lay off somewhere around 100 people and basically close the doors because they got hit with ransomware and they just couldn't recover from it. Like, that's heartbreaking to hear. So yeah, it's
the saddest words of tongue and pen are these: it need not have been, or it might have been, and I guess that's what tugs at my heartstrings when I see these events is, I mean, this just isn't necessary. It didn't have to happen. I mean, we're now 5 years in where the solution, at least to 99.7% of we still claim, though I've still seen test results that say it's maybe even stronger than that when it comes to even malware that's packed in just seconds before, that kind of strength is out there. This just didn't have to be, and it pains me when I open and see those headlines.
Good question that came in. The question basically is around what are our predictions around kind of like the next generation of incident response platforms. So as the analysts say, it's more profitable for vendors to build and sell detect and respond after the fact type products versus prevention products. So is that a decent strategy going into 2020?
That's a great question. And I think that actually gets to another point. We're talking through kind of predictions here, and specifically with ransomware. The bar to deny access to an asset is somewhat lower than gaining complete control of, say, an environment and utilizing it for other means. And I think we're going to potentially see transition in the coming years to where we're not just having our access to our data denied, but potentially access to other things that exist in this connected environment. So things like Internet of Things devices, so maybe cameras or security systems or HVACs, or even, can you imagine the headlines when, like pick your favorite connected car company, and all of a sudden people are getting notices to pay $5,000 to unlock their vehicle so that they can drive it to work. I think that we're going to be there someday. But that's a great question about particularly incident response platforms. And how do we combat this? And I think John hit on it. It was an older thought to defense in depth, and I think there's still some place for that as far as making sure that, the castle walls are high and strong, and then you have, various additional technologies in place on the inside to make sure that the attackers cannot move easily. But I think really the approach of protecting the endpoint first and foremost with very strong predictive technology can really cut through a lot of the capabilities for this type of malware, and frankly, the entire vectors of attacks like bad data, but other types of denial attacks. And on the IR side, I do think with folks that have visibility on the endpoint, that is one ground truth, really, that is very useful for incident responders. Folks can, if you have that visibility and the ability to affect things in real time at the endpoint, you can really stop a lot of attacks. Same with on the internal networks. If you have visibility onto devices and other things, you can do a lot there. And I think we're kind of transitioning to more of that model than say something looking at those castle walls and seeing what's coming over them.
Excellent point, Siggs, and thank you so much for that comment. And I would like to kind of pose these last two topics to you, starting out here in the last 5 minutes or so here. As you're out investigating a lot of these incidents that are occurring and triaging and stopping the bleeding, if you will, within seconds, you look at things like email compromise, smishing, right? Sending out phishing through SMS, credential theft, these other elements. What do you think you're going to see this year as kind of, these top vectors or elements in these incidents you guys are responding to?
We've seen the rush to the cloud for software as a service. Everybody's rushed to doing online services such as email. There's Office 365, G Suite, others out there. Really, I think that the technology considerations were somewhat trailing the technology and the ease of use. And I think we've seen business email compromise in particular. We've seen a massive explosion of hackers utilizing that ease of use and basically that service-based infrastructure as an effective attack vector. I think we're going to start seeing some pivots to things that are outside of email. So other things that are really in the same model. So we started to see a few of those last hack season where we had, HR and pay applications that we started to see being targeted. We worked with certain incidents. We had some new clients come forward that needed help with these, and we worked through them. And part of that, we talked to law enforcement, and they were just kind of seeing the tip of the iceberg last year on that. So I think we're going to see a lot more of that being an attack vector. So not necessarily your connected email services, but other things are used in the same manner. I'm interested to see the other panelists if you have any comments on that as well.
I've had communications with some of my colleagues, and the business email compromise was particularly disconcerting because I had one conversation with one. He was a very experienced, very sophisticated user, but like many of us, was triple tasking late one night, and in came an email that was just perfect in its recreation of an invoice from a partner with whom he had done business for some time. Perfect in every detail. And the one little giveaway was so small and tiny that in the speed at which he was trying to process things, he just missed it. And you should have seen how he beat himself up afterwards, just over the fact that he tells other people what they should be doing, and yet he fell prey. I think that speaks to how unsettling the strength and prowess of this business email compromise can be. But I think you're right, Sig, in some respects, as we come up with solutions and responses to these, the bad guys have also demonstrated an ability to pivot back to the physical world. That as we gain strength in any one of these areas in cyber response, they'll just resort to a physical response and will task a trusted insider to use the physical access to go in and gain the access and the information that they need, walk it back out, and then send it to them. So this whole environment, the way these threats are churning and our response to them is giving way to yet another interesting dimension, is the fact that the physical world is going to have to be something we continue to consider, and is going to really demand that we all look at our insider threat programs, these viable insider threat programs that the U.S. government told us we had to have in place. We want to do business with them by the end of 2016. These viable insider programs are going to have to spring forward and actually augment and complement whatever prowess we exhibit in any of these other areas we discussed today.
Relating closely to both spear phishing as well as business email compromises, I would like to sort of just raise the issue of data subject access requests as an attack surface. We've recently had a couple of new laws come in. May 25th, 2018, GDPR kicked off at Article 15, providing data subjects, so anyone resident in the EU, the right to examine what information is held by a company about them. January 1st, the California Consumer Privacy Act kicked into effect. It won't be enforced until July 31st, but the law is effective now, so many companies have rolled out its ability to respond to data subject requests. So you are entitled as a California resident or a data subject residing in the European Union the right to request companies to tell you what data they hold about you. And very interestingly, one of the recitals of the GDPR, 64 for the curious, says, hey, you should take some steps to verify. Many companies are doing a really terrible job of this. I mean, some are doing excellent work, but recently, researcher, actually a doctoral candidate student at Oxford University, James Pavur, P-A-V-U-R, did an article, a white paper for Black Hat last year, in which he contacted dozens of US and UK companies with the information he was able to garner on his fiance to use to identify her. So her name, her email, a professional email, and a phone number, which you could pick up from LinkedIn, taking wild guesses at Gmail, looking at a company website and personal websites to pick up phone numbers. So no data that was particularly difficult to acquire, was able to then take that out, fill out data subject requests, found that many would provide him answers with no verification or very weak verification. And he had companies turn around and provide him with credit card information, travel details, account logins, full US Social Security number. One UK hotel chain gave him the complete record of that person's overnight stays and what they spent money on in, the complete receipts from the hotel. Two UK rail companies provided records of that person's journeys taken with them over the last several years. And one US-based educational company handed over her high school grades, along with the mother's maiden name and the results of a criminal background check.
That's crazy.
So
awesome.
That it's where companies even trying to do the right thing and comply with privacy regulations, they may in fact be creating possible security risks.
Excellent. All right. Well, we are at the bottom of the hour. I really appreciate all of our esteemed panelists, John, Greg, Sig, and Eric. Thank you guys so very much. Absolutely great discussion today. Several questions came in. We will address those. If we didn't get to them audio, obviously, we will address those out to you through email. Thank you guys very, very much for attending today. We appreciate you taking the time out of your day to come listen to us. And we look forward to you in the future on our next BlackBerry Cylance webinar. Thank you very much and have a fantastic day.